There we go. So, welcome to another episode of Carta de Viner. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a very, very diverse um, crowd this evening. So, thank you from wherever you are connected. And we have a very special episode as well, prepared tonight. I'm hoping a wholesome conversation on one of the books that has defined my teenagehood, by Mircea Eliade. I will let Nicola introduce our guest tonight and we can get this conversation started. Thank you.
Thanks, Serena. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce my friend, Dr. Tereza Violet Stehlíková, a Czech-British artist, researcher, and educator whose practice spans moving image, installation, and participatory performance, and is driven by cross-disciplinary collaboration. Stehlíková holds a PhD from the Royal College of Art in the theory, practice, and tactile language of moving image, having taught at and been affiliated with both the RCA and the University of Westminster. In 2021, she moved to the Czech Republic, where she is head of the visual arts department at Vysoká škola kreativní komunikace. I'm sorry for butchering that. And also teaches at the Academy of Performing Arts, the Film Academy, and Umprum in Prague. Stehlíková is engaged in artistic research, focused on investigating the role of our senses and embodiment, the role these play in and conveying meaning through artistic practice. She collaborates with scientists, in particular experimental psychologists and neurologists, investigating cross-modal interactions and embodiment. Her first book, Exiled from Our Bodies: How to Come Back to Our Senses, about her artistic research journey, has recently been published by Routledge. Stehlíková is the editor of an online arts journal/platform called Tangible Territory, which features essays and articles by established artists and authors from the disciplines of the arts, science, and philosophy, centered around the role of our senses in creating meaning in art and life. She is also a co-founder of the annual International Ecstatic Truth Symposium that explores issues arising from the interface between animation in all its expanded forms and documentary, now in its 8th year. And tonight we will be discussing Mircea Eliade's The Sacred and the Profane, and the nature of religion, and how it sort of interacts with Tereza's practice. Just to say a few words briefly about that book, it was first published in 1956, and according to the publisher, is concerned with myth, symbol, and ritual, and puts forward the belief that while contemporary people believe their world is entirely profane or secular, they still at times find themselves connected unconsciously to the memory of something sacred. It is this premise that both drives Eliade's exhaustive exploration of the sacred, as it has manifested in space, time, nature, and the cosmos, and life itself, and buttresses his expansive view of the human experience. In Eliade's words, our chief concern will be to show in what ways religious man attempts to remain as long as possible in a sacred universe, and hence what his total experience of life proves to be in comparison with the experience of the man without religious feeling, of the man who lives or wishes to live in a desacralized world. So I've prepared some questions to put to Tereza, and sort of assigned various headings to various quotes from the book. But we're essentially discussing Tereza's practice in relation to this book. But first, to start us off, I wondered if you might be able to tell us, Tereza, am I right in thinking that it was John Berger who made you aware of this book? And perhaps you could say a bit more about how you first came to the book and what drew you to it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Nicola, for the introduction. And yes, it was John Berger. It actually happened when I was in France, in his house, and I was lucky to spend some days with him there, and we had obviously many conversations. And at one point, I asked him about a passage in one of his books that I liked a lot, which really stayed with me. And it was from his book, called "And Our Faces Brief as Photos." This is a very small book. And there was this section there which talked about home, the idea of home, and that somehow at home you at this like a cross point of vertical and horizontal axis, and that somehow you there you connect you closest to the heaven, and somehow I asked him about like where this idea came from, and he said to me, "Oh, that's from the book by Mircea Eliade, Sacred and the Profane, and you should get it." So that's exactly what I did. I got my copy, and I've I found the passage that he's been talking about. I've got my copy, so that's my copy of the book, and it's it sort of really stayed with me, that passage, maybe of all of them, and we can talk about it later why.
Yeah, so I thought in order to kind of tease out, the resonances, or, what you feel you've taken from the book in terms of thinking about your work and your approach to making work, I might kind of quote some phrases and passages from the book and see how you kind of respond or how they resonate with you. And I've kind of grouped these under themes. The first one being space and place, then time, rituals, mythologies, body, house, cosmos, the role of nature and significance of vegetation, and the role of water. Not promising we might get through all of these, but yeah, to start with the space and place. For religious man, space is not homogeneous. He experiences interruptions, breaks in it. Some parts of space are qualitatively different from others. There is then a sacred space and hence a strong, significant space. There are other spaces that are not sacred and so are without structure or consistency, amorphous. Revelation of sacred space makes it possible to obtain a fixed point and hence to acquire orientation in the chaos of homogeneity, to found the world and to live in a real sense. So that's sort of the first part of a quote there, which relates to space and place, and just wondering what you thought or how you feel that might connect in some way with your work, or what maybe it doesn't,
Yeah, no, it does, and it actually connects also with the John Bircher story and this kind of access to the heavens and to the world below, the dead, and I think I mean I should say, which I think is very relevant also, because having grown up in Prague in the communism, it was a very sort of unreligious environment to grow up in. Yeah. Obviously, like, religion was suppressed by the communists, and my family was not actually also not religious at all. So there was no one was going to church. It just really wasn't at all there. And yet there was, I think, in very much the way that Eliade talks about this kind of unconscious sort of connection to places. And for me, this like a sacred kind of, I can call it a sacred space, is the house that I grew up in, which my parents are still living in, which is right in the center of Prague. And it's got this spiral staircase, which actually almost like embodies this idea of sort of time, that every time you walk up, you're going up the spiral of time. And this house features in my dreams still. So it's very, very powerful in a way that's way kind of outside of any rational understanding. So I think that's just one example of this, like sort of like privately sacred space, where I feel something different to a normal everyday space.
Yeah, and perhaps we can come back to the role of the staircase specifically. But yeah, on the subject of that kind of desacralized world, you said you sort of grew up in. Eliade goes on to say that the experience of profane space still includes values that, to some extent, recall the non-homogeneity peculiar to religious experience of space. There are, for example, privileged places qualitatively different from all other places. A man's birthplace, or the scenes of his first love, or certain places in the first foreign city he visited in his youth. All these places still retain a kind of exceptional, unique quality, and they are holy places of his private universe, which is what you were saying. It as if it were in such spots that he had received the revelation of a reality other than that in which he participates through his ordinary daily life.
Yeah, yeah. And I think so this quote is also something that I've picked out from the book, and that really connects with this other project that I've been working on for now 13 years, and it's called Four Generations of Women. And it's basically a way of trying to capture these shared moments between my grandmother, who is now 100, my two daughters, myself, my mother. And it happens usually in the countryside where we have my parents have a house, which is not a house that we grew up in. It's something we got 25 years ago, but somehow it actually feels very much like this kind of sacred space, that it has become this space just through going there and spending this time together with the family. And I should also add that part of this Four Generations of Women project is actually a way of staging these small rituals. And these rituals really started as an excuse to just spend time together, but have some kind of structure around it. So it's not any, again, it's not, doesn't come out of any religious tradition or anything, but it's actually gained this like power over the years. So again, it really makes me think about what Eliade talks about, that idea that we all need, we somehow need these rituals to feel connected.
Speaking about rituals and the project you just mentioned, Four Generations of Women, I wonder if you could talk a bit more about what Eliade refers to as the ritual by which he constructs the sacred space, and reflect on the ways in which you set up the kind of scenes and the spaces in which you film the Four Generations of Women film works.
So I think it's, for me, the way I interpret it is to do with attention. So it's like giving things deep kind of attention. And that's actually, it sounds simple, but it's actually quite difficult. And for me, the process of filming things is almost well, it's kind of an excuse or so, but it's also a way of creating this very focused attention. So it's also that the camera somehow, as the tool, helps me to well, to frame these moments. And I'm deliberately making these films in the same spaces. I mean, sometimes it moves, but there's always this sort of interior space of the barn where we meet. And a few times what I did is that I actually took some of the work that I filmed in the previous years, and I would project it on top of us standing there. So I'm kind of playing visually with this idea of time being layered and kind of compressed in one place. So
Well, we can come back to time as well. Serena, did you have?
Well, I think Teresa was essentially going exactly into the direction of describing how I don't know how you pronounce this into English actually. Hierophany, I think is the word that is used by Eliade in the book, into your own process of noticing, filming, and documenting the everyday. But I was just kind of channeling Ruxandra Trandafoyu, Professor Ruxandra Trandafoyu, who's joined us for a few of Carta de Vinere's episode, and who's very much into sound and music, and wondering how does that play into your work? How do Eliade's ideas influence your approach in terms of sound, music, or voice?
Mm,
So the tension between the ordinary transcendence in the auditory experience.
that's a very interesting question. I've never thought about it actually in that way. I think because I'm so focused on the visual and on the embodied, so kind of very much thinking about being there through the body. And but of course the sound is also very important, and I've worked with mainly with one composer, so very often it's actually musical, but it's a very sort of sensitive music that I feel like over the years of collaborating, she really somehow brings out these like uh, inner processes somehow through the music. So it's very much about just very simple sound effects, but then also this sort of musical element that creates, well, that somehow it does help us enter a different time, I think, when the music comes. So there's, for example, one film in which actually I use different composer, and uh, and there's a sequence where the women run through a forest and they passing a birthday cake to each other. So it's this kind of like a ritual of a birthday celebration, but it's also about this idea of this kind of interconnection of generations. And I've used this music there, which is very it's composed by this Czech street musician, actually, but it sounds very medieval almost. It's got this like a very mythical music, and it just like fitted perfectly somehow on this film. So actually, it's only when you ask this question now that I thought back to this particular film where the music has this kind of very strong, powerful message.
Thank you.
I wondered if we could come back to the house and yeah, the going back to the importance of space and place, and because it's not just the house outside of Prague that you were just mentioning, but also spaces in Prague, family settings, and thinking about the house or this kind of these kind of domestic spaces as sanctuaries. Eliade says, exactly like the city or the sanctuary, the house is sanctified in whole or part by a cosmological symbolism or ritual. And yeah, the house is not an object, a machine to live in. It is the universe that man constructs for himself by imitating the paradigmatic creation of the god, the cosmogony. Every construction and every inauguration of a new dwelling are in some measure equivalent to a new beginning, a new life. I wondered what you made of that, just to dwell a bit more on these sanctified spaces that you use and keep coming back to.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, probably because I come, as I've said, from this very like desacralized world, maybe I have this need to make it that way more. And actually, the making films has this kind of element of being able to transform reality in some way. It's got this kind of mythical dimension. So actually, I don't like, I'm not, ironically, I'm not someone who would necessarily do it in their normal life. I mean, I like to have a nice house and I care about it, but yeah, but I think it's actually the work. It's like saying this is now a project. Now actually I can work through some of these ideas that yeah, that I'm like very interested in the idea of well, I'm also very interested in liminal spaces, and I think that directly connects to this idea as well, this kind of threshold places. And and as anyone who speaks Czech knows, that the word Praha, Prague, actually Prague means a threshold. So there's something quite liminal about the city itself. So I think sort of having grown up there and having lived right at the center, like the house that I spoke about with the spiral staircase, it's actually right in the center of Prague by the Charles Bridge, and it's built on a place where there used to be a Romanesque church. So I think from any kind of like a point of view of like where churches used to be built, I think there's some kind of energies that one can detect no matter like what you think about these things. It's sort of there. There's presence of things in the stone, of this kind of embodied history, and I think maybe all of that somehow seeped into me, even unconsciously.
Well, that really resonates with Eliade saying that houses are held to be at the center of the world, and on the microcosmic scale to reproduce the universe, and also to say something about the staircase again as this kind of liminal space, but also one which connects the sky and the heavens with what's below. He says that human existence is possible only by virtue of this permanent communication with the sky. And you will be coming to the role of nature later in the conversation, but perhaps you could say something about, about those things, the center of the world, the staircase, the communication with the sky, and
Yeah, I mean, again, like it sounds like very obsessive, my staircase, but I am quite obsessed with it. And it's actually like I think many years ago in London, when I lived in London, and I sort of asked myself this question, like if I was going to point, and maybe that was even before Mircea Eliade, like if someone asked me where is the center of the world for me, it would be there. It's the center of the staircase. It's very strong, this kind of feeling. And the staircase actually, it's very beautiful, and it has a sort of glass, semi-transparent ceiling in the middle. So actually you can see the daylight coming through. And then also sometimes as a child in dreams, I would have these dreams where I would be falling like into the earth underneath the circular floor. So I had these like nightmares of going into these catacombs. So for me, I think this idea is not just an idea, it feels very real. It's kind of like I felt it. And that's why I connected so much with Eliade, but also with Gaston Bachelard's book, The Poetics of Space, because that kind of has similar ideas in terms of philosophy.
Serena?
I absolutely resonate with what you're saying and the obsessiveness of it as well, because I don't know if you noticed, but you talk about the staircase. If you look at the logo
Yeah.
for our organization, is precisely drawn. So it's one of my creations, but my obsession with the continuous line and the spiral that is inspired from a very way back by the Kokuten tradition, and the spiral being at the center of it all. But the center of this door logo is the generation. So if you look at it, you can interpret it as either a baby or a mother and a baby. And it's actually an R. So it's door coming in and over itself, as in the main point of Romanian identity, because it's one of the words that is untranslatable, represents missing home, missing a part of you, and the connection that it brings or it misses at the same time. So coming back to that and the generational stuff, I'm just wondering, how is that translated into your work, inspired by this obsessiveness of just wrapping everything. You've talked about the fourth generation in your family and the space, and how is that all coming together in your work?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the generation, I was also thinking very much about like the DNA kind of spiral,
Yeah.
and the idea that also this obsessive returning to these rituals every year, where sometimes I don't know anymore what to do. I feel like I've been doing it for years. I had no idea how long I would have to make this, how long my grandmother would live. And but there is this kind of insistence somehow to keep doing it. And it somehow runs almost against all this sort of current obsession with things being quick and sort of changing quickly. So there's this like return always to this same project, and somehow well, kind of allowing the not knowing where it's going to take me also. So it's I think it's both. Well, it's very much about time, of course. Like the Generations project is about time. But and I feel that maybe the staircase and that whole location, because I have made few films there also in the location of my childhood home, but I find it almost too much. Like it's too strong. I can't. I'm not so free there. So actually, I find it more easy to make these rituals in the countryside house, where there's none of that deep history. And yeah, so I'm not sure if I completely answered your question, but yeah,
It feels to me like you're settling into the unknown from a disconnected place, allowing yourself to seep into a new a new perspective every year. And it does make me wonder, how does that, if you were to look at yourself when you started and have a conversation with yourself when you started and a conversation with you now, what would be the difference?
And that's like that's also very interesting, because I think like what I knew from the beginning of making this film is that it was like a message to the future in some way. Like there was not so much, like it was about capturing now, like this obsession actually with like capturing the present moment in its fully kind of embodied presence, like being as present as possible, and sending it to myself in this future self. That was always the idea. I always thought, well, one day we're not going to be together in the same space, and I need to somehow capture this. And now, of course, like 13 years on, I'm already in this future, but there's still more. Um, and I feel like I can't. Like, of course, I don't know. Like, I still don't know. I didn't know when I started, and I still don't know. And I think the whole meaning of the projects is evolving, and somehow that's the point, that the meanings is not fixed.
I wondered if we might come to the theme of time now, thinking about the fact that I'm quoting you here, that you say it's equally important these rituals happen in the summer when we can be close, in close visceral contact with the landscape, nature, with minimal clothing, able to feel the texture of the vegetation, the breeze, and the scent of the flowers as we walk barefoot, feeling immersed in the here and now. And yeah, think about this in relation to the fact that you do with this, specifically with this 4 Generations of Women project, come back to these ritually rich seasons, these sacred periods of time, generally in the summer, by way of these rites.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So it's again started from my sensory interest, and sort of, because again, I think it's because I've realized that that actually somehow there is something very spiritual and intangible, or that in order to get to this kind of intangible, whatever you call it, spiritual or sacred space, that actually I personally feel it has to be done through the senses. Like it somehow is like touch. It's actually, if anything makes you feel you present, it's the body, it's the touch, it's smell. Um, so I think that is like one element in terms of the summer being easier in that way, because yeah, we can, like in the water rituals, and I've just been writing actually about that film that was about water. So, well, actually it wasn't about water. I didn't start with this project saying, oh, I'm now going to make a film about water. It actually came out through many different elements coming together, and water was something we just used because it was like a excuse in a way to actually touch each other. So we used it to kind of splash, and then we went for a swim, and all of that was filmed. But actually, strangely, things started to emerge through this in conversation that my grandmother would share, and she started to talk about these stories of drowning in the family, in her family history, but many drownings, and so suddenly, like all these kind of watery narratives just sort of emerged very spontaneously through this filming and talking and creating little rituals. And so I suppose at that point I also realized, I mean, not even at that point, I realized it much earlier, is that it's a kind of way of like clearing ourselves also of some transgenerational trauma. It's not something I set out on, like when I started making the film, but it it actually, it has this sort of powerful effect also, which I suppose rituals also have, that somehow you process things through it. I might have digressed again. Sorry.
No,
No, not
this is
at all.
your.
I actually, it's one of the things that I was going to ask you about, because we talked about a lot of items, but smell was not there. And I did wonder how, I think, it features in your work, through like multisensory installations, like touch. You mentioned food and sound. Um, but I did wonder, how does that work with newer technology like AR, for example? Would you consider stepping into that space, or would that be a step too far?
Well, so my interest in the smell, it started after my interest in touch, touch in the context of audiovisual media, which was what my PhD was about. But obviously, this touch, it's somehow easier because one can, even in a medium that's intangible, you can actually communicate touch through this sort of empathy, and yeah, there are many sort of ways that filmmakers can do that, and we can feel things as an audience, as an embodied spectator. But of course, smell, that's very different story. Like, I mean, that's so personal. It's so connected to memory, actually, and I, but I like that impossibility of it as a kind of artistic, imaginative project, almost this idea. Well, but you probably could, and of course, like if we see, I don't know, a flower that we recognize, some of us might be able to recall the smell. Not everyone. Some people are better at it, but it's much more tricky. So yeah, so then I started to work with also with like collaborating on immersive events, with working with chefs and with perfumers, and so then of course that in kind of real physical environments, then we could really play with that. And I know that people also these days, that there are technologies that can literally uh, how do you call it, like scent, create smell somewhere where you can kind of take it from a street and send it into an art gallery. So the technology is there, but maybe I'm interested in it more in a kind of imaginative sense, like what it can, because it can open
Trigger.
up, yeah,
It
it
can
can open
trigger.
up exactly like very sort of internal spaces.
So from a memory perspective, essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I was, yeah, wondering if we could sort of think about time in relation to what you were saying about the water work and healing from transgenerational trauma, things like that. So healing, regeneration, and kind of whether you conceive of the past, maybe looking back at some of these four generations' works and thinking of that as a kind of mythical time, or whether there's more of a sense of nostalgia there, for kind of origins or returning to kind of a paradisal situation. Um, yeah, just a collection of thoughts there.
Yeah, it's funny because I suddenly remembered when I started this project, it was actually, so it was much more difficult in the beginning to do it. So I had to really go against everything sort of in me screaming against doing it, because it was very, uh, it felt very confrontational somehow, like the idea that, and I deliberately forced myself to like really take the camera and really look at the faces, to get each of the women, including myself, to sort of stare into the camera, to and then me behind the camera sort of watching every twitch of the face. It was just like, oof, it was so uncomfortable, and everyone felt uncomfortable. But somehow by doing it, we actually um, somehow got more comfortable with it. So actually, in some way, it feels like it got, like it sort of became more positive somehow, this project over time. So actually, the beginnings where there were a lot of tensions, also very visible in some of the films. The very first films actually more about that than about the ritual. So the ritual actually came in the second year, not in the first year. So the first time it was just sort of observing and studying the situation. So I don't, in that sense, I don't have like a nostalgic feel of the very beginning. But also I should also add that yeah, like there was this sort of nostalgia, and I think what helped me to really feel it intensely was the fact that I didn't live in Czech Republic for most of those, well, for 10 years at least of making that film. And I was very aware that like we came for the holiday, it would be 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and we would be in this countryside house, and that was the only proper time we had together as these women. So it was very precious. So I also had this need to just it actually gave me this intensity to do it. While now, ironically, when I'm here all the time, that's sort of not there anymore. So it's become more difficult to do it. But I do it anyway.
A sort of related question, given what you were saying about, perhaps the uncomfortableness and the deep penetrative gaze. How do you feel sort of showcasing these what are essentially very intimate kind of private works, sharing these private sacred spaces with wider public, given that these are artworks that you showcase within kind of exhibition contexts and as well as online?
It's actually, I feel like maybe that's part of this like process of or the processing of things is actually the sharing of them. And I'm very lucky that my family were they all very fine with that. They don't have a problem. They're very open. And even my older daughter, like she actually came to cinema. I had one screening in London in like a cinema space where we showed, it was like an hour, proper like a 90-minute program of the films. And I mean, not just the generations, but and she was there and she sat through all of it, and that was very very brave of her. Um, and my mom, she's accompanied me many times to exhibitions that I had, and yeah, so actually my grandmother not anymore because she's too old now, but she would be totally fine with that. So I think altogether it actually never has been a problem, and the response has always been very, very nice and positive, and people, I feel like people really connect with it.
Thinking about time as well as ritual, Eliade says that religious man lives in two different times, a linear one, but also a circular time. I wondered how you felt about that concept.
Well, I think that really connects again with the spiral. I think this sort of spiraling of our planet, around the sun, and I've always felt, I mean, like Sorina, I've been attracted to, drawn to spirals, but I'm also thinking of it, yeah, in terms of time, because it's like very useful way to think of the seasons and the idea that we sort of always coming back to the same place, but it's not the same place anymore. There's always these like shifts, and I had the same feeling actually when I came when I moved back to Czech Republic as well. This idea of like coming back, but actually it's not back because the spiral. I've been moving along the spiral, So, and of course, like these rituals are in some way staging them makes me really appreciate Eliade's point that actually, like, by doing it, I do become like I'm sort of back where I was, but I'm also in a different place. And I'm, of course, like we 1 year older, and but actually we also there's something very grounding to be there again in the same space, in the same configuration. Um, so it feels, yeah, it feels like a very important acknowledgement also of aging and sort of not looking away from that, even in terms of the camera and filming, you know, these faces where you really can't hide from the fact that time is aging all of us.
Well, thinking about space, time, and ritual, as well as kind of mythologies, I wondered if you could say a bit more about maybe some of the objects, symbols, or totems relating to family history that feature in some of your films. I'm thinking of The Thread Between Us from 2012 and A Moment Held in 2022. Yeah, and how these might be thought about.
Mm-hmm. I think so again, because I'm so interested in embodied memory, and so yeah, the idea that objects somehow hold stories. And so, for example, in the film that you mentioned, Moment Held, that was one of the few that was actually filmed. I've got some of them, actually, few of them are filmed in the apartment in Prague at the top of this spiral staircase. And in my grandmother's apartment, where she, of course, she's lived there for not her whole life, but most of her life. And of course, it's full of objects and things that I remember from my childhood. And so, for example, I think in the moment held, she, as a child, I remember she had these like boxes, those like full of treasures. It was just cheap buttons and maybe like jewelry, and some of it was just was nothing precious. But for me, these objects kind of go back to my own childhood and playing in her apartment. So in that film, I just wanted to kind of sit there and let us all just pull out these objects and let my younger daughter play with it and somehow try and capture this atmosphere of this apartment that I've got this connection to. And then also there's another film which is where the object is like a central to the film, and that's it's a traditional costume that my grandmother's mother made in 1918. And in that film, again, it happened very spontaneously, but my grandma basically took it out of her wardrobe, and my daughter, the older daughter, who was, I think, about 14 at that time or 12, she put it on. And there was again this kind of very interesting moment of time kind of compressing, because she had this dress that actually her great grandmother made, and then my grandma wore it, and there was a photo that my grandmother has of herself, and she was 15 in this dress. And then yeah, so that was also like one of the subjects of the film. But in the countryside, it's more about nature. Yeah, that's there we sort of focus more on nature.
Well, yeah, I think we should come to talking about nature and the kind of significance of vegetation in, for example, summer rituals, from you to me, um, thinking about woman, earth, and kind of fecundity. Eliade says the social and cultural phenomenon known as matriarchy is connected with the discovery of agriculture by women. It was women who first cultivated food plants. In relation to your scenes that involve food, fresh fruit, vegetables, and eating, and sort of the woman becoming the owner of the soil and the crop.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. So I think that was especially like in the year 2020. So when the pandemic, in the beginnings of the pandemic or middle of the pandemic, and obviously being in London and feeling very trapped, and then somehow we basically managed to get out, drive, and drove all the way to straight from London to this house in South Bohemia, and it just felt like it's sort of, I think, by contrast and all these repressed feelings in London, sort of feeling displaced and in this small apartment, very disconnected from nature, um, that we suddenly, like I suddenly felt so strongly this, like the importance of belonging to a place and to actually being like rooted. And so it really made me think about the idea of like what it means to be rooted to a place, versus being exiled or being in a kind of elsewhere. And I mean, I like both of those realities, but I think, yeah, during the pandemic and being so starved of that family kind of security, that place really spoke to me, and I started to think at that time about, because I remember reading somewhere about the idea of root vegetables and this idea that you can kind of, yeah, there's this connection somehow between the one's roots and then these vegetables that can become like a symbol of this being rootedness. So then that film kind of evolved around the idea of also creating like a meal from root vegetables that we shared. So there's also like sections where we digging through the soil, and it really just came out of, I think, yeah, like an outsider, not like a village person who would do it every day as part of their life, but as a city urban person coming and just sort of needing to reconnect somehow with a physical landscape.
Mm. Just coming back to the idea of kind of matriarchy and motherhood and soil, um, earth, your film Welcoming Clementine from 2019 features Clementine as a baby. And Eliade says, still more widely disseminated is the laying of the infant on the ground. And I remember that scene where she is lying on the ground. And in some parts of Europe, it is still the custom today to lay the infant on the ground as soon as it has been bathed and swaddled. The father then takes the child up from the ground to show his gratitude. And yeah, thinking about the earth being also a threshold between life and death, new life, and you know, and the coming of death. Yeah, and this other quote which I found, which says that the infant is placed on the ground immediately after birth, so that its true mother shall legitimize it and confer her divine protection on it, in terms of that being, Mother Earth. So yeah, wondering how you see these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think again it sort of connects with this idea that, like well, that we all, I think, need these rituals, that somehow we don't have enough of them, and so I try to make my own ones, but they're not, yeah, they're just intuitive kind of responses. But actually, as you were speaking about sort of birth, but also death, it made me think about like these sort of later films, like the last one that I've made, where what's really coming to the surface now, I feel, but it's actually in all of them, but it's sort of becoming more prominent, is this feeling as my grandmother is getting older and older. She's starting to forget things, which is not surprising, being 100. But I somehow feel like that she's somehow becoming part of the landscape, and that also she's becoming part of us more. I somehow really feel it's not like an abstract idea. I feel like I can feel she's starting to like mix up memories. She thinks that like the stories my mom says are her stories, or she mixes different childhoods of like, was it my mom, was it my daughter? And I actually sort of think about it that it doesn't feel pathological. There's actually something quite nice about this idea of this kind of entanglement with the wider world. And in the landscape, I feel all of that much more naturally. Somehow it feels very um, well, grounding, I suppose. The ground is very grounding.
Um, yeah, he thinks about nature and the earth being presenting itself as universal mother and nurse, and wondered if we could think about that in relation to water, which you spoke about earlier. The water rituals work, the baptism and renewal, but also the symbolizing of death and life in terms of the, the family stories you were telling us about the drownings and things. And yeah, just thinking about water as being a purifying and regenerating force. And Eliade's quote that in a number of languages, man is called the earthborn, and it is believed that children come from the depths of the earth, from caverns, caves, ravines, but also from ponds, springs, and rivers. And there's that scene in one of your films where you're floating while you're pregnant, which is a beautiful moment.
Yeah, so that was obviously part of that same film, the water rituals that I've already mentioned. And that was very, like, it all kind of happened very naturally, all these things. It was almost like I had another, actually, that's very interesting. I had another filmmaker in that one involved. She was filming some of the scenes, and she's actually Romanian. And she was wonderful. So we basically just had uh, like a little tasks, like whether it's splashing water, let's just splash water, like, and see what happens. Very basic. But actually, like through the act of splashing and laughing, and that's when things suddenly, like my grandma suddenly started to remember this story of the baptism in the 50s in the hospital in the communist times, where the priest still was like going baptizing the newborn babies, but he was doing it in a very like conveyor belt, like from one to the next to the next, but still somehow doing it. So yeah, so that memory just sort of spontaneously emerged, and that was similar with the other things. Like we said, let's go to this pond near the house, and we just sat there and we let the water sort of inspire us just to chat. And again, of course, things started to kind of connect, and then my mother just decided to go and take a swim in her dress, and it was very beautiful, warm evening. And then I followed, um, also being pregnant, like uh, 8 months maybe already, and and that was again very profound experience because I sort of found myself like I just lay on the water, and it was just again a very kind of liminal space where the almost the threshold between what's in water outside, the temperature was just beautiful, kind of even. And then obviously I thought how, strange. Then I've got another being inside of me and she's floating also in this in water. So she's kind of like doubly floating. And and that came out as a kind of redemptive moment actually after some of the more dark stories that emerged through these talks about the drownings and some of the family trauma.
Mhm. Oh, Serena, you're on mute.
Sorry, I forgot that I put myself on mute. What was the name of this Romanian person that you've just mentioned that you worked with? It's okay if you don't remember it right
Oh no,
second,
I do remember, but I've
but
got complete like window now, like a complete, she's actually like
blank.
a dear friend. But I'll tell you when I
That's
remember.
fine. That's fine. That's fine.
Mm.
I'm wondering if anyone has any questions in the audience, or Serena, whether you had any final questions as we're coming to the end of our time together.
For me, it's more of a musing, so and more of a thank you, because this whole conversation has made me go back to my stack of pictures, reminding me both of my both grandmas, who are no longer unfortunately with me, and the kind of pictures that I've taken of them, of us. And funnily enough, what you're mentioning, the little things, the triggers of memory are are all in my pictures. Um, the little cups, the little spoons, the aprons that I know that were one of my grandma's favorites, the rituals of cutting my hair and all of that kind of stuff. So between generations, it's definitely there. It's just not something that we necessarily take the time to acknowledge. So thank you for creating the space that is that has touched me. So
Oh, thank
and
you.
it's from my perspective, it's definitely amazing to hear you two talk about the inspiration that was created by somebody from my own identity, but seen through a different lens altogether. I also noticed that Alina is saying the concept of people fading into us, the new generations and the future, is really an insightful way to discuss legacy with the young generations. We're living in a time that people start to forget about the importance of legacy. And maybe sharing personal stories and memories can help remind us we do not have to burn down the world to build the future.
Mm,
Very
that's
beautifully
nice.
said.
That's very nice.
Mm.
And I've remembered now the name, of course, of the Romanian filmmaker. She's called Paula Onet.
Okay, I'll make a note. I have shared with the people that joined the this evening one of your YouTube videos
Oh, thank you.
of summer rituals is the one that hit me because my grandma used to have exactly that kind of iron, and it was my favorite thing to play with. So I recognize it and I absolutely love it. And the picture that I found on one of the websites with the four generations in the mirror, that is again one of my obsessive type of frame that I come back to again and again, every time I have 2 or 3 people of different ages in the room, I have to find a mirror and I have to take a picture. I don't know why, it just makes me feel good. Somehow it gives a completely different perspective on things. But that's pretty much it. That's my experience.
No, thank you.
Did you want to
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I just want to say about that picture in the mirror. That was actually one of these Eliade moments as well. I mean, it's impossible to maybe describe. It just had this effect of sort of, when you see these sort of generations in order, but then there's this like tunnel of time, almost like this sort of infinite mirror. When I was filming it, I had this like a very strange feeling from just a very momentary feeling, and I just want to make a little point about Jung, because Carl Gustav Jung is another like a big inspiration for me, and it was interesting for me to reread Eliade today. In the very last chapter, I was looking this afternoon again, reminding myself of how he basically talked about the psychoanalysis and the unconscious sort of being like almost like the last place that we have that still is like totally kind of connected to this religious sort of sacred way of being that we've become so disconnected from. So that really resonated with me.
Serena, did you want to ask our final question about book recommendation?
Yeah, of course. So we always end up on a question that essentially puts every single speaker on the spot. So apologies for that. But if you were to recommend a book by a Romanian writer or somebody who wrote about Romania, what would you recommend?
That's very tricky.
I know.
If I can't even remember my friend's name,
we can come back to it another time.
Maybe,
Not a problem.
Yeah, I'll have a think.
Yeah, so we can always add it to the comments once we publish the interview on YouTube. So you definitely have time. But thank you ever so much for spending this time with us this evening, and thank you for such a rich sensory imagination triggering experience. Definitely was for me, and I'm sure that the people in the group enjoyed it as well. Uh, it is the last conversation of the year, so we're definitely ending up on a high. Next year, we are going to start with 3 slightly different formats because they are author interviews as well as creative workshop. So creative writing workshops. So we're starting in January with Veronika Kostake and her journey of towards rebirth, following her challenge with health and having to look things differently. So we'll do that in Walsall, alongside the Romanian Plus Community Centre, and we'll follow in Birmingham with Patrick McGuinness, on a different type of conversation, looking at history and the last 100 days of essentially Romanian communism. And we'll do that in collaboration with the University of Birmingham and Culture Forward, like I said, in Birmingham. And last but not least, we'll move to Coventry in March alongside Madeline Potter and the history of the Roma alongside our friends from the Roma project. All three have completely different lenses to completely different subjects. They are all linked to life stories as well as history, as well as writing, and they are all threaded through identity in what I like to say Romanian communities. So thank you very much for your time. We hope that you have a wonderful weekend. And if we don't see you again, have a Merry Christmas and a wonderful, at least more peaceful New Year. And see you again at Carta de Vine. Thank you.
Thank you, Tereza.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.